Hello, welcome to Untold Travel Stories. Today I'm going to take you on a journey across the world, from one end of the earth to the other, told in a way you have never heard before. Dim the lights in your room, lean back, and let the sound of this video carry you. I do not remember how I crossed the ocean. I have stopped trying to remember those crossings. The spaces between continents have become a kind of sleep for me. I close my eyes on one shore, I open them on another, and whatever happens in between belongs to the water, not to me. What I remember is this. I opened my eyes, and the light was different from any light I had ever known. Not the pale gold of Anatolia, not the sharp white of Iceland, not the heavy amber of India. This light was warm, but with an edge, a brightness that pressed against your skin, a brightness that had weight. I was lying on a stone floor, in a large room, a very large room. The ceiling was high above me, painted. I could see figures on the ceiling, colors red, green, gold, brown, swirling together. People, bodies, hands raised, faces looking in every direction. A mural. I sat up, I looked around. I was inside a building, a grand building, marble floors, wide staircases, iron railings, and on every wall murals, enormous murals, figures the size of gods, workers with their fists raised, women with braided hair carrying sheaves of corn, soldiers, priests, serpents, eagles. A story was being told on these walls, the story of an entire people, painted in colors so fierce that even now, even in this empty world, they seemed to be shouting. I stood up. I walked to the nearest wall. I looked at the face of a woman in the mural. She was looking straight ahead, not at me, past me, at something in the distance that only she could see. Her eyes were dark, her jaw was strong. She was not smiling, she was not frowning. She was simply present in a way that I, a man who did not know his own name, envied deeply. She knew who she was. It was painted into her face. I walked through the building, room after room, hall after hall, every wall covered in stories. I understood, without anyone telling me, that this was a government building, a palace, maybe the seat of a nation. And the nation had chosen to cover its walls, not with photographs of leaders or maps of territory, but with art, with the faces of its own people, with their history, their pain, their pride. I had never seen anything like it. I found a door that led outside. I pushed it open, and I stepped into Mexico City. The city was vast. I had been in large cities before, Istanbul, Florence, Kabul. But this was different. This city stretched in every direction farther than I could see. Buildings, some tall, some low, some old, some new, spread across a wide valley. And around the valley mountains, volcanoes maybe, their peaks hidden in clouds. The air was thin here. I could feel it in my chest. The city was high, higher than I had expected, and it was sinking. I could see it in the buildings. Some of them leaned, some of them had cracked along their foundations. The ground beneath this city had been soft for centuries, built on a lake, someone had once told me, or I had read it somewhere. The Aztecs had built their capital on a lake, and the city that came after had inherited the lake's instability. Even now, even in this empty world, the city was still sinking, slowly, patiently, returning to the water it had been built upon. I walked through the streets, wide avenues, trees, tall, old trees with roots that had broken through the pavement. In some places, the roots had lifted entire sidewalks. The trees were winning, slowly, without violence, just by growing. I passed a park, a large park with iron fences and stone benches and paths lined with jacaranda trees. The jacarandas were in bloom, purple, a purple so intense it looked painted. The blossoms had fallen onto the paths and onto the benches and onto the grass, and everything was covered in this soft purple carpet. I stopped walking. I stood in the middle of the purple path, and I realized I was standing inside a painting. The murals on the walls of that government building were painted by human hands. But this park, this purple, was painted by the world itself, without brushes, without paint, just with time and seeds and rain. I sat on a stone bench beneath a jacaranda tree. The petals fell around me, very slowly, one at a time, like small, soft, purple words being dropped from a great height. I caught one in my palm. I held it. It weighed almost nothing, but it was real, and it was beautiful, and it had fallen specifically into my hand. Out of all the places in this empty park, in this empty city, it had chosen my palm. I know this is not how flowers work. Flowers do not choose. But in this world where choosing had become so rare, I allowed myself the small fantasy. I walked deeper into the city. I came to a neighborhood of old houses, colonial houses, stone walls painted in colors that had faded but were still visible: terracotta, cobalt blue, lime green, dusty pink. Every house was a different color, as if the people who had lived here had agreed, without speaking, that no two houses should look the same, that each house should be its own small song. I walked down the middle of a cobblestone street. My footsteps echoed between the colored walls. In one doorway, a bird cage hanging from a hook. The door of the cage was open. The bird, of course, was gone, but the cage was still swinging, very slightly, in the breeze. I watched it swing back and forth, a small pendulum, counting the seconds of an empty world. Further on, I came to a market, an open-air market, wooden stalls with canvas roofs. The canvas had rotted in places. Sunlight came through in patches on the stalls. Things, so many things: clay pots, painted bowls, woven baskets, dried chilies strung on threads, small wooden animals, a jaguar, a rabbit, an armadillo carved by hand, still sitting in neat rows on a wooden shelf, and masks, wooden masks, painted in wild colors. Some were animals, some were demons, some were skulls, human skulls, but decorated, covered in flowers and patterns and bright paint. I picked up one of the skull masks. I held it in my hands. It was not frightening. That was what surprised me. A skull should be frightening, but this skull was smiling. Its teeth were painted gold, its eye sockets were ringed with red flowers, its forehead was decorated with blue swirls. This was a culture that had looked at death and said, "You are not our enemy. You are our guest. Sit down. Have a drink. Let us paint your face." I put the mask back where I had found it, gently, facing outward, so that the next visitor, if there ever was one, would see the smile first. That evening, I found a small house in the old neighborhood to sleep in. The house had a courtyard in the center, open to the sky, a small fountain in the middle, dry now, but with blue tiles around its edge that still caught the last light of the day. I sat in the courtyard. I took the watch from my pocket. I opened it. "I will come back to you, M." The ticking was there, faint, familiar. I held the watch up so it could see the square of sky above the courtyard. "We are in Mexico," I said, "a country I have never been to, a country where they paint skulls with flowers. I think you would like it here, M. Whoever you are." The watch ticked once, twice. I closed it. I put it back. I cooked a small meal that night. Beans I found in a clay jar in the kitchen. A few dried tortillas that were still miraculously edible, hard and cracked, but edible. I warmed them on a small fire I built in the courtyard. The taste was new, earthy, smoky, unlike any food I had eaten on any other part of my journey. Every country tastes different, because every country's earth is different, and the earth comes through the food, always. I slept that night in a small room off the courtyard. The bed had a woven blanket on it, orange and red and yellow, the colors of fire. I pulled the blanket over me, and I slept. In my dream, the woman from the mural was standing in front of me, with her dark eyes, her strong jaw. She was looking past me, as she had been in the painting. But then, just for a moment, she turned her head, and she looked at me. She did not speak, but her eyes said something. "Welcome. You are late, but you are here." I left Mexico City on foot, heading south and east. The road climbed out of the valley. The air grew thinner, then thicker again as I descended the other side. The landscape changed from city to suburb, to village, to farmland, to open country. Cactus. I had not seen cactus before, not like this, tall, thick, with arms reaching upward like people frozen in the middle of a prayer. Some of them were taller than houses, some of them were older than anything else in the landscape, standing alone in dry fields, patient, full of water they had saved for years. I walked past them with respect, because a cactus in a dry land is a kind of saint, holding what it has, giving only what it can spare, surviving by discipline. The road south took many days. I passed through small towns, each one painted in its own colors. One town was entirely yellow, another was blue and white, another was pink. With green doors and red window frames, the colors were not random. I understood this. The colors were chosen by people who had lived in a landscape of brown and gray and green, and who had decided that their houses should be something else, something bright, something that said, "We are here, we are alive, look at us." And now the people were gone, but the colors remained, and the colors were still saying it. I walked for 8 days perhaps, through dry hills and small valleys and long straight stretches of road where the only company was the cactus and the sky and the occasional cry of a bird I could not see. And then, one afternoon, I came over a ridge, and below me, in a wide valley surrounded by mountains, I saw a city. Low buildings, red rooftops, church domes, and everywhere color, Oaxaca. I walked into Oaxaca in the late afternoon light. The streets were cobblestone, the buildings were low, 1 story, 2 stories, no more, made of stone and plaster, painted in colors that had weathered into something even more beautiful than they must have been when fresh. Dusty rose, burnt orange, sage green, a deep, almost black purple, pale gold, each building a different shade, each wall a different story, and on many of the walls murals, not the grand political murals of Mexico City, smaller ones, more personal. A woman's face, painted in profile, with flowers in her hair. A skeleton playing a guitar, smiling, of course, because in this country skeletons always smiled. A jaguar, mid-leap, frozen in paint on the side of a bakery. I walked slowly. I looked at each mural the way you look at a photograph of someone you have never met but feel you should have known. I came to the central square, a large open plaza with a stone church on one side and covered walkways on the other 3 sides. Arched walkways with columns where cafes had once set out their tables and chairs. The tables and chairs were still there. Metal tables, wooden chairs, some had fallen over, most were still standing, waiting for customers who would never come. I walked to one of the tables, I pulled out a chair, I sat down, and I imagined for just a moment that I was a customer, that a waiter would come with a small notepad and ask me what I wanted, and I would say, "Coffee, please, black, and a glass of water." No waiter came, of course, but I sat at the table for a long time anyway, because sitting at a cafe table in a quiet square in the afternoon light is one of the small pleasures that makes a person feel human, and I needed to feel human. After a while, I stood up. I walked into one of the buildings facing the square, a restaurant maybe, or a bar. There was a long wooden counter behind it, shelves of bottles, tequila, mezcal. I recognized the names from somewhere. I took one of the bottles down, mezcal. The glass was dusty, but the liquid inside was clear. I poured a small amount into a glass I found behind the counter. I held it up to the light. It was pale gold, like honey, but thinner. I smelled it. Smoke, sweet smoke, and something else. Something earthy, something that came from the ground. I drank it in one sip. The heat went down my throat and into my chest and spread outward, like a small sun being lit inside me. I poured one more glass. This time I drank it slowly, and I felt for the first time in a long time, warm. Not from the outside, from the inside. I put the bottle back on the shelf. I did not take it with me. The bottle belonged here, in this bar, in this square, in this city of colored walls. I walked through more of Oaxaca that evening. I came to a small church. The doors were open. I went inside. The church was dark, cool. The walls were covered in gold leaf. Not the mosaic gold of Venice, a different gold, thicker, warmer, like the gold of the mezcal I had just drunk. On the altar, dozens of small statues, saints, virgins, angels, each one dressed in real fabric. Tiny robes of silk and lace, faded but still intact, each one with a painted face, some of them smiling, some of them weeping, some of them looking up at the ceiling with expressions of such longing that I had to look away. And in front of the altar, candles, hundreds of candles, all of them cold, all of them waiting. I took my lighter from my pocket. I lit one candle, just one. The flame rose, small, yellow, trembling, and the gold on the walls came alive. It moved, it breathed. The whole church seemed to inhale. I sat in a pew and watched the single candle burn. One candle. In a church built for hundreds. In a city built for thousands. In a world built for billions. One candle was enough. One candle proved that someone was still here, that someone still cared enough to strike a flame. That night, I slept in a small house near the church. The house had a courtyard. They all seemed to have courtyards here, with a lemon tree and a bougainvillea vine climbing one wall. The bougainvillea was in bloom, magenta, the color of a sunset that refuses to end. I lay on a narrow bed. I pulled a woven blanket over me. This one was different from the blanket in Mexico City. The pattern was geometric. Diamonds and zigzags in red and black and cream. Every blanket in this country told a different story. I was beginning to understand that the patterns were not decoration, they were language. Each shape meant something, each color meant something. I could not read them, but I could feel them, the way you feel the meaning of a song in a language you do not speak. Before I slept, I took out my notebook. I wrote, Oaxaca. A city of colored walls and smiling skulls, a city that painted death with flowers and served it mezcal. I think the people who lived here understood something that the rest of the world forgot, that death is not the opposite of life, death is part of life, the other half, the quiet half. And if you can learn to sit with it, to paint its face, to pour it a drink, then you are not afraid anymore. And a person who is not afraid of death is free to be alive. I closed the notebook. I turned off my lighter. The room went dark. Outside, through the window, I could see the bougainvillea in the moonlight, magenta, even in the dark. Some colors do not need the sun. I want to pause here for just a moment. If this story is finding you tonight, if these words are keeping you company in the dark, please consider subscribing to this channel and leaving a like on the video. It helps more than you know, so I can keep telling these stories. For travelers like you, thank you. Now let us continue. I left Oaxaca early in the morning, before the sun had fully risen, before the colors on the walls had woken up. The road climbed steeply, out of the valley, up the side of a mountain. The air grew cooler as I climbed. The city below me shrank. The colored walls became small squares of paint. The church domes became small dots of gold, and then the clouds came, not above me, around me. I was climbing into the clouds themselves. Thin white mist, first, then thicker, then so thick I could only see a few meters ahead. I kept climbing, because the path was clear, because my feet knew what climbing felt like by now, because some places can only be reached by going up. When I came out above the clouds, I stopped, because above the clouds, on top of the mountain, there was a city. Not a living city, an ancient one, a city of stone, temples, pyramids, platforms, wide plazas, all of it built on the flattened top of a mountain, as if someone had taken a knife and cut the peak off and said, "Here, build here, above everything." Monte Alban, the Zapotec people had built this 2,000 years ago, maybe more, long before the Spanish, long before the Aztecs, long before anyone whose name I might have known. They had looked at this mountain and decided that the top of it was the right place for their gods, and they had carried stones up here, one by one, and built a city in the sky. I walked into the ruins. The stone was gray. warm from the sun that had been hitting it since dawn. The plazas were wide and flat. Grass grew between the stones, small yellow flowers. Lizards darted across the warm surfaces and disappeared into cracks. I walked to the center of the main plaza. I stood there, and I turned in a slow circle. On every side of me, temples, stepped pyramids, stone platforms with staircases leading up to altars that had been open to the sky for 2,000 years, and below me, on every side, clouds. The valley was invisible. The world was invisible. Only this stone city, floating above the clouds, was real. I was standing on an island in the sky. I climbed the steps of the largest pyramid. They were steep, narrow. My calves burned. My breath was short, but I climbed, because when a staircase has been built to lead somewhere, you must follow it, even if you do not know what is at the top. Even if the person who built it has been gone for 2,000 years. The staircase is an invitation, and an invitation in this empty world is a sacred thing. At the top of the pyramid, there was a flat platform, open to the sky. The wind was strong up here. It came from every direction at once, as if the sky itself were breathing on me. I sat down on the stone, cross-legged, the way I had sat in the cave in Bamiyan, the way I had sat beneath the tree in Siberia, the way I was learning, slowly, to sit, and I looked out. Clouds below me, mountains in the distance, rising above the clouds like dark blue teeth, the sun directly above, pouring its light down on me without any obstacle between us. I was as close to the sky as I had ever been, without flying, without climbing a great mountain, just by walking up a staircase that someone had built 2,000 years ago for exactly this purpose, to be close to the sky. I sat on that pyramid for many hours. I did not write. I did not take the watch from my pocket. I did not think about M or Elena or Anna or anyone. I only sat, and I felt the stone beneath me, and the wind around me, and the sun above me. And I understood why the Zapotecs had built their city here, because up here, above the clouds, the noise of the world could not reach you, the arguments, the fears, the wanting. All of it stayed below, in the valley, in the mist. Up here, there was only stone and sky, and in the space between stone and sky, there was room to hear the things that could only be heard in silence. I found something on the top of that pyramid, in a crack between two stones, pushed deep, as if hidden deliberately, a small clay figure. Very old, worn smooth by centuries of rain, it was a human figure. Standing, arms at its sides, no features left on its face, no eyes, no mouth, just the shape of a person. Someone had made this figure 2,000 years ago, had shaped the clay with their fingers, had fired it in a kiln, had carried it up these steps, and had placed it here on top of a pyramid, on top of a mountain above the clouds. An offering, a prayer, a message to the sky. I held the figure in my palm. It was warm from the sun. It weighed almost nothing. I put it back where I had found it, in the crack between the stones, deep enough that the wind would not take it. It had been here for 2,000 years. It could stay here for 2,000 more. Before I left the pyramid, I took a small stone from the ground beside the staircase. Just a pebble, grey, round, warm. I put it in my pocket, a piece of Monte Alban, traveling with me now, a piece of a city that had been built above the clouds by people who had understood that the most important things in life happen when you stop climbing and simply sit. I walked back down through the ruins as the afternoon light turned golden. The clouds below me were beginning to thin. Through the gaps, I could see the valley floor far below, green patches, a thread of road, the distant hint of colored walls. Oaxaca, waiting for me to return or to move on. I did not return. I moved on, south, deeper into this country, toward the forests and the ancient places that I could feel pulling me forward, the way the watch in my pocket always pulled me forward, with its faint, steady ticking. The land south of Oaxaca changed slowly. The dry hills gave way to greener hills. The cactus gave way to trees, first small trees, then larger ones, then after many days of walking, the trees became a forest. Not a forest like the taiga of Siberia, This was a different kind of forest entirely. This forest was alive in a way I had not experienced before. The trees were enormous. Their trunks were wide and covered in moss and vines and small plants that grew on top of other plants. The canopy was so thick that only thin beams of light reached the forest floor, green light, filtered through a million leaves. And the sounds in the taiga, the forest had been almost silent. Here the forest was a chorus. Birds I could not see were calling from every direction. Insects hummed. Something was moving in the undergrowth, rustling, crackling, then going silent, then rustling again. Water dripped from leaves, a constant soft percussion, like rain, but not rain. Just the forest breathing out its moisture. I walked through this forest for days, following old paths that had been cut through the undergrowth and were now almost entirely reclaimed. The vines and the ferns and the roots were taking the paths back. In another few years, there would be no paths at all. The forest would close over them completely, the way water closes over a stone that has been dropped into a river. I walked carefully, watching where I put my feet, because in a forest like this, the ground was full of surprises. Roots that could trip you, holes that could swallow your ankle, small streams hidden under curtains of fern. On the third day in the forest, I heard something, not a bird, not an insect, not the wind, water. Moving water, a lot of it. I followed the sound. It grew louder. The trees thinned slightly, and then I came out onto a rocky ledge. Below me a waterfall, not a small one. A waterfall that fell from a height of perhaps 30 meters into a pool of turquoise water. The water was the color of jade. The spray rose up in a fine mist that caught the light and made small rainbows that appeared and disappeared and appeared again. I sat on the ledge. I watched the waterfall for a very long time. The sound of it was enormous, but it was not a loud sound exactly. It was a full sound, a sound that filled every space, that left no room for other sounds, that was so complete that it became a kind of silence of its own. I climbed down to the pool. I took off my shoes, my shirt. I walked into the water, cold, so cold that my whole body tightened, every muscle, every nerve, and then release, a kind of letting go that I had not felt since the cold streams of the Karakoram. The water held me, not gently, not roughly, just honestly, the way water holds everything, without preference, without condition. I floated on my back. I looked up at the sky through the gap in the canopy above the waterfall. Blue sky, white clouds moving very slowly, and I felt clean, not just physically. Something inside me had been rinsed. Some dust that I had been carrying for months, maybe years, had been washed away. I climbed out of the pool. I dried in the warm air. I put my clothes back on, and I continued deeper into the forest. On the fifth day, the forest opened suddenly. I came around a bend in the path. The trees parted, and in front of me, rising out of the green like something from a dream, there was a pyramid, a Mayan pyramid, covered in moss, vines climbing its sides, trees growing from cracks in the stone near the top. But the shape was unmistakable. A stepped pyramid, limestone, built 1,000 years ago, maybe more, by people who had understood the movements of the stars and the turning of the seasons and the mathematics of time itself. The pyramid was not alone. As I walked further into the clearing, I saw more structures, smaller temples, stone platforms, a long building that might have been a palace. A ball court, a long, narrow field between two stone walls where a game had once been played, a game that, if I remembered correctly, had been a kind of prayer, a ritual, where the outcome mattered not because of who won, but because the game itself was an offering to the gods. I walked through the ruins slowly. The forest surrounded them on every side. The jungle had been fighting to reclaim this place for centuries, and it was winning. Slowly, tree by tree, root by root, but the stones were still standing. The pyramid was still standing. I climbed it. The steps were uneven. Some had crumbled. Some were covered in moss, so thick it was like stepping on a sponge. I climbed carefully, holding onto vines when I needed to, At the top of the pyramid, I came out above the canopy of the forest, and I could see. For the first time in days, I could see beyond the trees. The forest stretched in every direction, an ocean of green, unbroken, unending, and from this ocean here and there, the tops of other pyramids rose, other ruins, other ancient places scattered through the jungle, like the tips of fingers reaching up through green water. This whole forest was full of buried cities, cities that had been great once, cities where astronomers had watched the stars and priests had counted the days, and children had played in courtyards and mothers had called them home for dinner. All of it, now beneath the trees, beneath the moss, beneath the patient, slow green remembering of the jungle. I sat on top of the pyramid. I ate some food I had gathered in the forest, a few wild fruits, some nuts. I drank water from my bottle which I had filled at the waterfall, and I took out my notebook. Chiapas. The jungle has taken back its cities. I do not know if this is a tragedy or a kindness. The stones are still here. The staircases are still here. The ball courts where prayers were played are still here, but the jungle has wrapped itself around all of it, the way a mother wraps a blanket around a sleeping child, not to smother, to protect, to keep warm, to say, "Sleep now, I will hold you, and when you wake, if you wake, I will still be here." I closed the notebook. A howler monkey called from somewhere deep in the forest, a long, low, resonant sound, like the sound a mountain would make if a mountain could speak. I listened until the sound faded, then I climbed down the pyramid, carefully, step by moss-covered step. That night, I slept at the base of the pyramid, on the stone floor of what might have been a temple entrance. A small doorway carved with glyphs I could not read, figures with elaborate headdresses, animals, symbols. I lay on my blanket. I looked up through the doorway at the sky above the ruins. The stars were different here. Seen through the gap between the trees and the stones of the pyramid, they were framed, like looking at the sky through a window made by people 1,000 years ago. And I thought these same stars had been visible through this same doorway on this same night 1,000 years ago. A priest had maybe stood here, looking up, counting, calculating, understanding something about the movement of the heavens that would take the rest of the world centuries to figure out. The stars had not changed, the doorway had not changed, only the person looking through it had changed. Now it was me, a man without a name, without a people, without a calendar, but looking at the same stars, through the same stone frame, with the same wonder, and wonder I had learned does not require a name or a people or a calendar. Wonder only requires eyes and a willingness to look up. I slept, and in my dream the pyramid was not a ruin. It was alive. Torches burning on every level, drums playing somewhere below, the sound of many voices chanting something I could not understand but could feel in my chest. The dream was warm, the dream was full. When I woke in the morning, the jungle was quiet, the torches were gone, the drums were gone, the voices were gone, but the warmth was still in my chest, and I carried it with me as I walked on. I walked out of the jungle slowly. The forest thinned, the ground rose, the air cooled, and after 2 days of climbing through hills covered in pine here in this tropical country, because the mountains were high enough to hold a different kind of cold, I came to a town, San Cristobal de las Casas. I did not know how I knew the name. A sign, maybe, at the edge of the road, or maybe I had simply known it the way I sometimes knew things now, without remembering the learning, just the knowing. The town sat in a valley between mountains, a high valley, cool, often wrapped in mist, and when I arrived in the late afternoon, the mist was there, thin, white, moving through the streets like a slow, careful visitor who did not want to disturb anyone. The buildings were low, colonial, plaster walls painted in the same fierce colors I had seen in Oaxaca, but here the colors were softer, muted by the mist, by the altitude, by the cold air that turned everything a little blue at the edges. I walked through the cobblestone streets. My footsteps were the only sound. The mist swallowed the echo before it could travel more than a few meters. In the center of the town, a church, yellow, bright yellow, even in the mist, with red trim around the doors and windows, a baroque facade covered in carved saints and angels and flowers, all of them painted in colors that had once been bright and were now faded into something gentler, something that looked like they had been colored by the sky itself. I stood in front of the church for a long time. This was a different kind of church than the ones I had seen in Serbia or Venice or Kabul. This church had been built by conquerors, by men who had come from across an ocean and had planted their God in the soil of another people's land. But the church did not feel like a conqueror's building anymore. Time had softened it. The local people had made it theirs. The saints on the facade did not look European. Their faces were round, their skin was brown, their eyes were the eyes of the people who had been here long before any church had been built. The conquerors had brought the building, but the people had filled it with their own spirit. And now both the conquerors and the people were gone, and the church remained, holding both stories without choosing sides. I went inside. The interior was cool. Dark candles, hundreds of cold candles lined the walls. The floor was stone, worn smooth, and on the stone floor, scattered in places, there were dried pine needles. This puzzled me at first. Pine needles inside a church. Then I remembered or knew from somewhere that in this part of Mexico, in the highland towns, people had a tradition of laying pine needles on the floor of their churches for ceremonies, for healing rituals, for prayers that mixed the old ways with the new. The pine needles were dry now, brown, but they still smelled of pine, faintly, as if the last ceremony had been held not so very long ago. I knelt on the pine needles. I did not pray, but I knelt. Because kneeling in a place where others had knelt for centuries is its own kind of prayer, a prayer of the body, a prayer that says, I am small, I know I am small, and I am here. I stayed in San Cristobal for 3 days. I walked through the neighborhoods. I climbed the hill to a smaller church, a white one, from which I could see the whole town spread below me in the mist. Red rooftops, yellow walls, green trees, the smoke of fires that had once risen from every chimney on cold mornings. No smoke now, but the chimneys were still there, ready. In one house I found a loom, a wooden loom, standing in the corner of a room, with a piece of unfinished cloth still stretched across it. The cloth was half woven. The threads were cotton, white and blue and red. Someone had been weaving this cloth, thread by thread, row by row, and then had stopped. I touched the threads. They were still strong. The weave was tight, careful, every row perfectly even. I imagined the woman who had been weaving, sitting at this loom, maybe in the morning, maybe in the afternoon, the shuttle moving back and forth in her hands, the steady rhythm of the weave, back and forth, like a heartbeat, like the ticking of a watch. I sat at the loom. I did not try to weave, I did not know how, but I sat in the chair where the weaver had sat. I put my hands where her hands would have been, and I felt the ghost of the rhythm she had kept, back and forth, back and forth. Every craft has a rhythm, and every rhythm is a form of life. Even when the craftsperson is gone, the rhythm remains in the object, in the loom, in the threads that wait, patiently, for the next hand. On my last evening in San Cristobal, I sat in the central square. The mist had thickened. I could barely see the church across the square, just its yellow glow, softened and blurred, like a candle seen through frosted glass. I took the watch from my pocket. I held it in my palm. The ticking was very faint now. I had to press it against my ear to hear it. "We are going deeper south," I said to the watch, "into the lowlands, into the heat. There are places I need to see before." I did not finish the sentence. I did not know how to finish it. Before what? Before the journey ended? Before the watch stopped? Before I understood who M was, I did not know, and I had learned long ago that not knowing was not a failure. Not knowing was a kind of freedom, the freedom to keep walking without a deadline, without a destination, without an answer to arrive at. I closed the watch. I put it back. The mist moved through the square, around me, through me, and I let it. In the morning, I packed my bag. I left the town through the southern gate. The mist followed me for a while, clinging to my shoulders like a light shawl. Then, as I descended from the highlands, the mist fell away. The air warmed, the pine trees gave way to other trees, broader leaves, denser green. I was heading toward the lowlands, toward the Yucatan, toward something I had heard of in a dream or a whisper or a half-remembered conversation with someone I could no longer name. The cenotes, the sacred wells of the Maya. The land flattened. After the mountains and the highlands and the deep green jungle, the Yucatan Peninsula was a surprise, flat, dry in places, but not like a desert, more like a scrubland. Low trees, thorny bushes, white limestone showing through the thin soil like bone showing through skin. I walked for days across this flat land. The heat was different here, heavier, wetter, the kind of heat that wraps itself around you and does not let go, the kind of heat that makes your clothes stick to your body and your thoughts stick to each other. I drank water carefully. I walked in the mornings and the evenings. In the middle of the day, when the sun was directly above and the shadows disappeared entirely, I rested under whatever shade I could find. A tree, a ruined wall, sometimes just a large stone that cast a thin line of darkness on one side. On the fourth day in the Yucatan, I found the first cenote. I almost missed it. The ground just opened, a hole in the limestone. Not large, maybe 3 meters across, surrounded by low bushes and hanging vines. I got on my knees and looked down, far below, maybe 10 meters, maybe more. There was water, dark water, still, black as ink in the shadow of the hole. But where a beam of sunlight came through the opening and touched the surface, the water was not black at all. It was turquoise, a deep, luminous, impossible turquoise, as if the water were lit from below by some hidden light. I found a way down. Old stone steps carved into the wall of the cenote, narrow, slippery with moss. I went down slowly, holding the roots of trees that grew from the cracks in the limestone. At the bottom, I stood on a narrow ledge of stone just above the water. The air was cool, much cooler than above, and the silence was total. The kind of silence that is not just an absence of sound, but a presence of something else, a held breath, a listening. I looked at the water. It was so clear that I could see the bottom in the places where the light reached. White limestone, smooth, clean, and in the deeper parts where the light faded, the water turned from turquoise to blue, to dark blue to black, going down forever. The Maya had believed these cenotes were entrances to the underworld, Xibalba, the place of the dead, the place where gods lived in the darkness beneath the living world. Standing at the edge of this water, I understood why they had believed that. Because this water did not look like ordinary water. It looked like a doorway that led down and down and down into something that had no bottom. I took off my shoes. I took off my shirt. I slipped into the water. The cold was immediate, sharp, like a hand pressing against my chest. But after the first shock, the cold became something else. It became a clarity, as if the water were not just cooling my body, but cleaning my mind, washing away the dust of days and weeks of walking. I floated on my back. I looked up at the opening above me, a circle of sky, a circle of green, the vines and branches hanging over the edge, and beyond that, blue, a small circle of blue sky framed by stone and roots. I was looking up at the world from below, from inside the earth, from the place the Maya had called the underworld, and from down here the world above looked very small, very far away, very fragile. A circle of light in a hole in the ground. That was all the living world was, seen from below. I floated for a long time. The water held me, perfectly, without effort, as if it had been waiting for someone to float in it, as if holding a body was the cenote's purpose, and it had been empty for too long. I closed my eyes, and I let the water hold me, and for a moment, just a moment, I felt something I had felt only a few times on this entire long journey. Peace. Not the peace of understanding, not the peace of arriving, not the peace of finding an answer. Just peace. Simple, complete. Like a glass filled to the rim with clear water. No room for anything else. No need for anything else. I climbed out of the cenote slowly. I dried on the warm stone. I put my clothes back on, and before I left, I sat at the edge of the cenote and looked down at the water one more time. Dark, still, holding its secrets. I said, thank you. To the water, to the stone, to whatever gods the Maya had believed lived in this place. Thank you for holding me. I found 3 more cenotes over the following days. Each one was different. One was open to the sky, a large pool of turquoise water in the middle of a collapsed cave with ferns growing down the walls and butterflies circling above the surface. Another was completely underground, a cave I entered through a narrow crack in the limestone, crawling on my hands and knees until the cave opened into a vast cathedral of stone with stalactites hanging from the ceiling and a pool of water so still it looked like black glass. The third was the smallest, a hole barely large enough to look into, but when I leaned over the edge and looked down, I saw, far below, a glint of blue, and I heard very faintly the sound of water dripping, drop by drop, into the dark. Every cenote was a door into the earth, a door into the past, a door into a way of seeing the world that I was only beginning to understand. One evening, after visiting the 3rd cenote, I sat on the flat limestone ground and took out my notebook. The cenotes, doors into the underworld, but not a frightening underworld, a quiet one, a cool one, a world that holds you gently in dark water and asks nothing in return. I think the Maya understood something that most people forget, that the world is not only what is above, the world is also what is below, and the below is not death. The below is depth. The below is where the water is purest, where the silence is deepest, where the light, when it reaches you, is most beautiful because it has traveled so far to find you. I closed the notebook. The sun was setting. The flat land of the Yucatan turned gold, then orange, then a deep red that spread across the entire sky like a fire that had been lit at the edge of the world. I watched it until the last color faded. Then I lay on my back on the warm stone, and I watched the first stars appear. And I thought about the woman in the mural in Mexico City, looking past me, looking at something in the distance, something she could see and I could not. Maybe she had been looking at this, at the stars above the Yucatan, at the dark water of the cenotes, at the whole quiet, beautiful, heartbreaking world that was waiting for me to walk through it. Maybe she had been looking at me from 2,000 years away, and maybe now, finally, I was looking back.
The road to Mérida was long and flat and white, because the road was made of crushed limestone, and in the Yucatan, limestone is everywhere. It is the ground itself, the bones of the earth showing through. I walked for days along this white road. The sun was relentless, burning down from directly above, as if it had no other place to go. The trees along the road were short, twisted, adapted to heat and drought in ways that made them look like old people who had learned to bend rather than break. I drank water carefully. I ate what I could find. In one abandoned village, I found a small garden with chili peppers still growing, red and green, wild now, but fiercely alive. I picked a handful. I ate one raw. The heat of it exploded in my mouth and made my eyes water. But after the heat passed, there was a sweetness hidden underneath. The way there is always a sweetness hidden underneath, if you're willing to endure the heat first. Mérida announced itself slowly. First, the road became wider. Then there were walls on both sides, old hacienda walls, crumbling, covered in vines. Then the walls became buildings. Then the buildings became a city, a white city. Mérida was white, not the white of snow, not the cold white of marble, a warm white, the white of plaster and limestone and sun-bleached walls, the white of a city that had spent 500 years under a tropical sun and had learned to reflect the light rather than absorb it. I walked through the outskirts, past grand old mansions with iron gates and overgrown gardens, past smaller houses with flat roofs and narrow doorways, past a park with enormous fig trees whose roots had grown above the ground, creating caves and tunnels of their own. Everything was quiet, everything was still, but not dead. Mérida did not feel dead. Mérida felt like it was taking a siesta, like it had pulled down its shutters, hung up its hammock, and closed its eyes for the afternoon. And if you were patient enough, if you waited long enough, it might wake up again. I came to the central plaza. It was large, open, surrounded on all sides by grand buildings, a cathedral, the oldest cathedral in the Americas, a sign said, though the sign was half fallen. Government buildings with tall arched doorways, and on one side a long covered walkway where, once, people had strolled in the evening to escape the heat of their houses. In the center of the plaza, a stone fountain, dry, with a carved figure on top that I could not quite identify. A woman, maybe, holding something in her arms. I sat on the edge of the fountain. The stone was warm, the shade of a nearby tree covered half of me, and I just sat. After a while, I stood up. I walked toward a small side street off the plaza, and I found what I had been hoping to find without knowing I was looking for it. A house with a hammock. The hammock was hanging on the porch of a small house, stretched between two hooks in the plaster columns. It was made of woven cotton, white and cream, wide enough for a body. I had seen hammocks before in pictures in some other life, but I had never lain in one. I touched it. The cotton was soft, slightly stiff from years of hanging, but still strong. I sat in it carefully. It swayed beneath me. Then I lifted my feet off the ground, and I lay back. The hammock held me. It held me the way the cenote had held me, the way the water of the Ganges had held me, the way the arms of a person you trust hold you, completely, without question. The hammock swayed, very gently, very slowly, back and forth, like a heartbeat, like the ticking of a watch, like the rhythm of a loom in San Cristobal, like the rhythm of prayer beads passing through fingers. Everything in this world had the same rhythm. I was only now lying in a hammock in Mérida, understanding this. The sway of a hammock, the tick of a watch, the passing of beads, the weaving of cloth, the flowing of a river, the beating of a heart, all the same rhythm, all the same pulse. The pulse of being alive. I lay in the hammock for a long time. The porch was shaded. The air was warm but bearable. A small breeze came from somewhere, from the sea, perhaps, which was not far from here, though I could not see it. I closed my eyes, and the swaying carried me somewhere between sleep and waking, a place I had visited many times on this journey, but had never stayed in long enough. The in-between place, the threshold. In that place I was not walking, I was not arriving, I was not leaving. I was only swaying, back and forth, in the arms of something I could not name. When I opened my eyes, the light had changed. The afternoon had passed, the evening was coming. I sat up in the hammock. I put my feet on the ground. The stone floor of the porch was cool now. I went inside the house. The house was simple. 2 rooms, white plaster walls, a wooden table, 2 chairs, a small kitchen with a stone counter and clay pots hanging from hooks. On the table a vase, inside the vase, dried flowers, marigolds. The same orange flowers I had seen in front of Ganesha, back in Varanasi, marigolds, here, on the other side of the world, in a culture that had never met the culture that grew them in India, but both cultures had used them the same way, as offerings, as decorations for the dead, as small flames of color placed in the darkness to say, "We remember you. We have not forgotten. The world is smaller than we think. The world keeps saying the same things, in different languages, with different flowers. But the meaning is always the same." I found food in the kitchen, dried corn, a jar of black beans, some dried herbs I did not recognize but that smelled, when I crushed them between my fingers, like a forest after rain. I cooked a meal, beans and corn, simple, the oldest meal in this part of the world. The meal that had sustained civilizations for thousands of years. I ate at the wooden table, from a clay bowl, with a wooden spoon, and I ate slowly, because eating slowly in an empty world is a way of saying grace without speaking. That night, I did not sleep in the bed. I slept in the hammock. I went back out to the porch. I lay down in the cotton embrace. I pulled a thin blanket over me, a woven blanket I had found folded on one of the chairs with a pattern of small birds in yellow thread, and I swayed, and the stars came out above me through the gap between the porch roof and the edge of the street. And the watch in my pocket ticked, once, twice, very slowly, and I swayed, and I was held. I stayed in Mérida for 4 days. Each day I walked through different neighborhoods. I found small plazas with stone benches. I found churches, 3 or 4 of them, each one different. One was green, one was red, one was so old that the plaster had fallen away entirely, and only the bare stone remained, like a face without its mask. In one church I found a room in the back, filled with wooden saints. Dozens of them, lined up along the walls, some standing, some lying on their sides, some missing an arm or a head. They had been stored here, perhaps, when the church had been renovated, or they had been retired from service, old saints replaced by newer ones. And now they were in this room, waiting. For what? I did not know. I walked among them. I looked at their faces. Each face was different. Some were serene, some were anguished, some were simply blank, as if the carver had not decided what emotion to give them and had left the decision to the viewer. I stopped in front of one saint. He was small, maybe half a meter tall. He was holding a book in one hand. His other hand was raised, palm outward, as if he were saying, "Stop, wait, listen." I listened. I did not hear anything, but the gesture was enough. Sometimes the instruction to listen is more important than whatever you might hear. On my last morning in Mérida, I went back to the hammock one final time. I lay in it, I swayed, I closed my eyes, and I said to no one, to everyone, I could stay here, I could stay in this hammock, on this porch, in this white city, for the rest of whatever time I have. I could let the swaying be my whole life. I opened my eyes, but I won't. I stood up. I touched the hammock. I said thank you to it, because it had held me, and holding is a gift that deserves thanks. Then I shouldered my bag. I put the wool cap from Hunza on my head, which made no sense in this heat, but I had grown attached to it in a way that went beyond sense, and I walked out of the house. Out of the neighborhood. Out of Mérida. East. Toward the coast. Toward the last stop. The road east to the coast took 3 days. The land grew greener. The air grew wetter. I could smell the sea long before I could see it. Salt. And something else. A tropical sweetness. The smell of warm water and sand and the small living things that grow where the land meets the ocean. On the morning of the 3rd day, I came through a patch of jungle. The path was narrow. The leaves brushed against my arms, insects hummed around me, light came through the canopy in thin, bright threads. And then the jungle ended, and I was standing on a cliff. Below me, the sea, not the grey sea of the Black Sea coast, not the cold sea of Iceland, not the vast emptiness of the Pacific. This sea was turquoise. Bright, shallow, warm turquoise. The kind of blue that looks like it was mixed by a painter who did not believe in restraint. The kind of blue that makes you doubt your own eyes. And on the cliff ruins, stone buildings, small temples, a castle, a squat, square stone tower, perched on the very edge of the cliff, looking out at the sea, Tulum. The last Mayan city. The city that had still been alive when the Spanish ships appeared on the horizon. The city that had watched from this very cliff as the old world ended and a new one began. I walked through the ruins slowly. The stone was pale grey, weathered by centuries of salt and wind. The buildings were smaller than the pyramids of Chiapas, more human, built to a scale that a person could live in, not just worship in. I went to the castle on the cliff. I climbed its steps. I stood at the top, and I looked out at the Caribbean Sea. The water was so clear I could see the bottom. Sand, white sand, and patches of dark green where seagrass grew. And in the shallows, the shadows of things moving slowly beneath the surface. Fish, maybe, or turtles, or just the movement of the water itself, making shapes in the light. I sat on the edge of the cliff, my legs hanging over the side, my feet bare. The wind came from the east, from across the water, from places I would never reach. Cuba, maybe, the islands of the Caribbean, Africa, eventually, the old world I had already walked through, on the other side of this ocean. The world was round, I had always known this. But sitting here, on the edge of one continent, looking out toward another, I felt it. The roundness, the completeness, the way everything connected to everything else, if you walked far enough. I sat on the cliff for many hours. I watched the light change on the water. Morning turquoise, noon white, afternoon gold. And then slowly, as the sun began to descend behind me, the water turned to something I had no word for, a color between gold and rose, a color that existed only in this place, at this hour, for a few minutes each day. And I was here for it, out of all the days I could have arrived, out of all the cliffs I could have sat on. I was here, now, watching this light. That felt, in a way I cannot fully explain, like a gift I had been given by the world itself. I took the watch from my pocket. I opened it. I will come back to you. M? The ticking was almost gone now. I pressed the watch hard against my ear, and I heard it. One tick, a long pause, another tick, a long pause. The watch was dying, or the watch was finishing. I could not tell the difference anymore. Maybe there was no difference. I held the watch in my open palm. I looked at the words inside the cover one more time, and I thought about M, about who M had been, about who I had been. I had traveled across continents. I had walked through empty cities and sleeping forests and burning deserts. I had held strangers' notes and strangers' gifts. I had lit candles in churches where no one would ever pray again. I had cooked meals in kitchens that belonged to ghosts. And through all of it, I had carried this watch, and the watch had carried me.
We had carried each other.
I closed the watch. I held it against my chest for a long time. Then I placed it on the stone beside me, on the edge of the cliff, open, facing the sea. I left it there. For the wind, for the salt, for the rain, for the light that came every afternoon and turned the water to gold. The watch had earned its rest. And this was a good place to rest, overlooking the sea. With the sound of waves far below, with the ruins of a civilization that had watched the horizon for centuries, looking for whatever was coming next. I stood up. I was lighter now. Without the watch, the weight of it had been small, but I had been carrying it for so long that its absence felt like setting down a stone I had been holding in my fist for years. My hand opened, my fingers uncurled. I breathed.
I climbed down from the castle. I walked through the ruins one more time. I passed the small temples, the carved doorways, the stone walls where iguanas lay in the sun, motionless, ancient, unbothered by my passing. I came to a path that led down the cliff to the beach. I took it. The beach was small, a crescent of white sand between two rocky points. The water lapped at the sand gently, warm, clear, turquoise. I took off my shoes, my socks, my shirt. I walked into the water. It was warm, so warm it felt like being held by another body, by something alive, by something that knew you were tired and did not ask you to be anything other than tired. I waded out until the water was at my chest. Then I lay back, and I floated. The sky above me was enormous, blue.
A few thin clouds moving very slowly, from east to west. I floated. The water held me. The sky watched me. The ruins on the cliff above me stood in silence. And I was nothing. And I was everything. I was a body in warm water. I was a man without a name. I was every step I had ever taken, and every silence I had ever heard, and every candle I had ever lit. I was the taste of apricots in Hunza. I was the smell of spices in Peshawar. I was the purple of jacaranda in Mexico City. I was the dark water of the cenotes. I was the swaying of a hammock in Merida. I was all of it. and all of it was me. I floated for a long time, and then, very slowly, I swam back to shore. I walked out of the water. I sat on the warm sand. I let the sun dry my skin. I took the tesbih from my pocket. The only thing I had left, the wooden beads I had been carrying since the very first journey, since Cappadocia, since a lifetime ago. I passed the beads through my fingers. 1, 2, 3. The rhythm was the same. The pulse was the same pulse as the hammock, as the watch, as the loom, as the dripping of water in the cenote, as the waves on this shore. One rhythm, one heartbeat, running through everything.
I sat on the beach as the sun went down. The sky turned gold, then orange, then a deep, deep red, then purple, then a blue so dark it was almost black, and the stars came out, one by one, like small candles being lit by an invisible hand. The same stars I had seen in the Sahara, in Iceland, in the steppe, in Siberia, over the Bosphorus. The same stars, and I was under them again. I lay back on the sand, I looked up, and I thought about all the places I had been, all the people I had never met, but whose lives I had touched by touching the things they left behind, all the small gifts I had been given, all the small gifts I had left for others. A jar of jam in Bulgaria, a note on a gravestone in France, a candle in a church in Oaxaca, a watch on a cliff in Tulum. Small things. Left in the dark, for strangers who might never come, but left anyway. Because leaving something behind in a world where nothing lasts, is the most human thing a person can do. It is a way of saying, I was here, I cared, I did not give up, I closed my eyes. The waves came in, they went out, they came in, they went out. The oldest rhythm, the first rhythm, the rhythm that was here before any of us, and would be here after all of us. I listened, and the rhythm became my breath, and my breath became the rhythm, and there was no difference between the two. Somewhere, I could not tell if it was near or far, if it was real or remembered. I heard music, a few notes, a piano maybe, or maybe just the wind playing the ruins on the cliff like an instrument. A few notes, then silence, then a few more notes. I smiled. I did not open my eyes. I just smiled. And I let the music and the waves and the stars and the warm sand and the whole beautiful, empty, stubborn, patient world hold me.